All right. I've got about 15 minutes left. I want to get back to where we left off and was Joseph Imhotep. It's been over a month since we last visited Joseph. I'm going to pick up right where I left off. If you're new, I encourage you to go to the website, go to the videos, look up in the category Was Joseph Imhotep series, and start from the very first. I started this, I think it was the beginning or in the middle of last summer. But I've been staying at it because I want to finish, which hopefully I'll be able to do in the next couple months, and move on to a different series. But if you haven't seen any of those messages or heard any of those messages, I encourage you to start from the beginning. You can listen tonight, but catch up quickly. So I'm going to pick up where I left off. You with me? Thus far, based upon the evidence at hand, our conclusion remains and is reinforced. Imhotep and Joseph of the House of Hebrew sages, both known as Egypt's first vizier, I want to include Pathotep in that too, astronomer and pyramid designer, were one and the same person. We have discovered Abraham in Egypt's history and Joseph in Egypt's history, Egypt's documents. These records clearly establish that Abraham paralleled the time of dynasties 1 and 2. He journeyed to Egypt just as Dynasty 2 began in Memphis, and Dynasty 1 moved south to Thebes. We saw how Abraham's grandson Jacob, later named Israel, went to Egypt twice. His first trip was during a famine in Canaan, when he arrived in Egypt in the midst of Dynasty 2. Years later, Jacob's second trip was at the bequest of his son Joseph, who already was the vizier of Egypt. Joseph, in turn, had arrived in Egypt during the reign of Dynasty 3's King Zoser. And as I said before in a previous teaching, King Zoser was a pharaoh or a king, but he was not the only king of Egypt. And I'll get into that, God willing, in the next few live service programs. Joseph, in turn, had arrived in Egypt during the reign of Dynasty 3's King Zoser, the ruler who appointed him vizier over the land of Egypt. The records prove that Joseph remained in this powerful post through the reigns of 4 pharaohs encompassing the 3rd and 4th dynasties. Now, I'm not totally convinced King Zoser was the one that appointed him as vizier. It's possible. But I think there's some other options also, which I'll get to. Although it is staggering, there is one other consideration we must risk to complete our picture of Joseph Imhotep Pathotep. The book of Jasher makes a rather brash set of chronological connections. It tells that the Pharaoh who promoted Joseph to vizier made a pre-death request. He made Joseph promise him something. That when he died, Joseph would carry through with the promise he was about to make with the Pharaoh. He commanded that upon his death, Joseph should remain in charge of the land in order to help the king's young son. Now, let's read the book of Jasher. If you have one, you can write down the verses and read them at a later date. But I'll just read to them tonight as we go along here. In Jasher 58, verses 1 and 2, it reads, that's Jasher 58, verses 1 and 2. And it came to pass in the 32nd year of Israelites going down to Egypt, that is in the 70th first year of the first year of the life of Joseph. In that year died Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Magron, his son, reigned in his stead. And Pharaoh commanded Joseph before his death to be a father to his son Magron, and that Magron should be under the care of Joseph and under his counsel. That's in Jasher, the 8th chapter, verse 1 and 2. Same chapter, verses 9 and 10, it reads, "And Pharaoh, king of Egypt, sat upon his throne in his father's stead. But he was under the control and counsel of Joseph. And he was at first under the control of his father, as he was at first under the control of his father. Neither did he reign, but in the land of Egypt only, under the counsel of Joseph. But Joseph reigned over the whole country at that time, from Egypt unto the great river Perath." I'll read that to you again slowly. "Neither did he reign, but in the land of Egypt only, under the counsel of Joseph." What did that cover? But Joseph reigned over the whole country at that time, from Egypt to the great river Perath. So this Pharaoh's son that now is ruling, according to the book of Jasher, was ruling in a certain area of Egypt. But Joseph still had control of all of Egypt. Think about that. So if this Pharaoh's son that now is in the throne is only ruling certain parts of Egypt, according to Jasher, then who was the Pharaoh of the rest of Egypt, which Joseph still had control of? Within verse 10 is powerful evidence that what Jasher calls Egypt was not the whole land of Egypt. Notice that if Joseph became monarch, as multiple verses attest, then Joseph had essentially founded another dynasty, if that's what happened. Apparently this is so. I'm not too sure yet. For later, Jasher states that Joseph reigned as king 40 years. Well now, something to take a look at. If Zoser was Joseph's promoter, and Magron was Zoser's son, then Joseph ruled all Egypt, while Magron ruled only a part of Egypt at the same time. Then if Dynasty 4 succeeded Zoser's third dynasty, Joseph Imhotep must have founded Dynasty 4. Since historians credit Khufu as the founder of Dynasty 4, we encounter the outrageous suggestion that Joseph and Khufu are the same person. Now, wouldn't that just throw all your thinking about what you knew about Egypt's history right out the door? If Joseph happened to be Khufu? Though this model is not acceptable to me at this point of investigation, it merits further study. I believe it does too. The numbers do work, though. As Jasher continues, it suggests that after Joseph's death, Magron had constructed a new capital city. And it came to pass at that time, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, commanded all his people to make for him a strong palace in Egypt. That's in Jasher 61, verse 1. Khufu ruled from Memphis in Lower Egypt. Did Magron govern from On Heliopolis close by? It appears that when Joseph died, Magron moved to Memphis and built his new palace there. Then the new palace was not located in Upper Egypt, supported by Jasher's later statement that the Israelites were obliged to help in the palace project. Their land of Goshen was local to Memphis, not to southern Egypt. If the book of Jasher is valid on these details, it is possible to move to a new city and a new palace connotes a new dynasty to the ancient Egyptian chronologists. This new dynasty would be Dynasty 6, which did not follow Dynasty 5, but coexisted with it. The 5th dynasty, the priesthood dynasty, which had begun at Heliopolis, had by then relocated up the Nile to Elephantine in the south. What major factor makes this model of Khufu work? The number of years involved in this scenario appear to be accurate and can be proven in the king who succeeds Macron. Jasher says in Jasher 63, verse 4, "And it came to pass in those days, in the 102nd year of Israel's going down to Egypt, that Pharaoh, king of Egypt, died, and Milo, his son, reigned in his stead. And all the mighty men of Egypt and all that generation which knew Joseph and his brethren died in those days." As we will soon see, this Milo, who reigned 94 years, according to Jasher in the 77th chapter, is the same 94-year monarch mentioned in Egyptian records. He was Pepi II of Dynasty 6, king during the era of the Hebrew oppression and slavery. This apparently perfect match can add up to only one thing. The period of the personalities outlining Egypt's kings list correspond to Jasher's Hebrew coverage of the previous Exodus era. According to Jasher, Milo's reign ends 4 years short of the Exodus. Egyptian kings list placed Pepi II within 2 years of the end of Egypt's Old Kingdom and her most disastrous catastrophe. Is there solutions to these problems? This new information appears to snarl our theory that Joseph and Pathop were the same man, because there are legends concerning Pathop in his old age at 110 years, still serving as counselor to the king. I suggest that Joseph as king would not contradict with our existing model of Joseph as vizier. Jasher did not say that Joseph was no longer counselor to the king. Instead, it specified that the new king would remain under both the care and counsel of Joseph. It also emphasized that Joseph did provide Magron with counsel, even as Joseph took up leadership over the whole of Egypt. It is not likely that Joseph in his old age remained as the title vizier to the king, but still in his capacity as Pathotep, the old man of wisdom, and according to the old Pharaoh's desire, Joseph would have remained in the youngest king's service as his counselor. Whether counselor or king, Joseph would also have continued with his pyramid building project, a work which appears to have been interrupted by his death. There is curiosity concerning the vizier who served under King Khufu. His name was Himen. And Egyptologists speculate that he may have been the grandson of Senufru and cousin of Khufu. It is he who is generally credited with the building of the Great Pyramid, yet there is no direct evidence that he did so. Himen's stone portrait, today in the Hildesheim Museum, shows no features of Senufru. He was broad-faced and heavy-set like Khufu. So far, the identity of Himen remains a mystery to traditional Egyptologists and also to our new model. It is interesting, there is a distinct change in the quality of construction in the top half of the Great Pyramid. One can reason that the great architect had at that time died, and as a consequence, quality control suffered. Archaeologist Petrie, referring to the Great Pyramid, said, quote, "The original architect, a true one of accuracy and fine methods, must have ceased to superintend the work when it was but half done." Actually, a little more than half. End of quote. Is this a picture of the time of Joseph's death? The great architect, now dead, leaves the inexperienced vizier Himen responsible for something he knows little about: the task of completing a half-finished Great Pyramid. And by the way, the half they're talking about, which is a little bit more than half, is the half, if you look from the base of the pyramid looking up, it's really more the third part of the Great Pyramid, a place just above where the king chamber exists on up. And anybody who knows about the Great Pyramid realizes that the most important part of that Great Pyramid, what lies below that third of the pyramid, starting with the king chamber all the way down to the subterranean pit. Thus far we have followed Egyptian records and synchronized Hebrew and Egyptian chronologies without juggling the established Egyptian kings list. Would it be asking too much to also find Moses in Egypt ancient records? Can we find him there? But before we get to him, we got more ground to cover, friends. He has this theory, this author. There's others. And I intend to look at another theory to see if we can make some sense of all this information. Do I have any doubt that Joseph was Imhotep or Pathotep? Not at all. Do I have any doubt what the book of Jasher says? Not really. I believe what it is declaring in the book of Jasher. It needs more details, and we have to fill in more details if we can. But one thing we know, Joseph was no lightweight in Egypt. After Zoser or another more powerful pharaoh that was ruling and reigning at the same time. Multiple pharaohs. So, I want to introduce the subject back into the teaching. I will continue this next week. As we further look into another possible theory concerning what we know about Joseph after the information we have in the biblical record to see what he did between that time until the very end of his life. Are you interested? If you are, I want to hear from you. I'm glad we're back on the subject. I plan to be back on this subject and other subjects the last days as we now are set up once again and ready to go. Free me up, folks. If you're not part of the 200 to give at least $153 a month consistently, now's the time to become part of that. Don't sit there in the sidelines anymore. And if you can't do that, do something. Be participants. Be net casters or net throwers or anything else. Just do something. Now, I want to hear from you. Your responses have slowed down since I was not live for a few weeks on a consistent basis. You need to get back on the saddle and start communicating with me again. Let me know you're out there. You're supporting. You're listening. You're being encouraged. You're growing and learning. You're becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ on a daily basis. Now, I want to hear from you. So they'll play a song. You get busy. And like I said, we'll be back on this subject again next week. Tune in. Play a song.